Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the class. Let's record here. Just turn this on. Right, we're learning from a book which is called Likuti Torah. Likuti Torah was written by the first Rebbe of Chabad, the one who wrote the book, the Tanya. He lived like 250 years ago, and he was the main pupil of the Maggid of Mezrich. He started the whole Chabad movement. And this was before they moved to Lubavitch. Lubavitch was moved to by his son, who was the second Rebbe. And these teachings are designed to we should understand ourselves from the way God looks at us, and to reveal our potential, which God has given us, and to transform the world, which is the challenge that God has put us into. And in order to do this, we have to arouse an appreciation of the Creator, because He's infinitely close to us and He's creating us, and He expects a lot from us, but He gives us tremendous inspiration and energy and a feeling of responsibility to Him, and also the ability to see God, to feel God. We don't use this too much. That's the book of the Tanya says that's a person who's a tzaddik. A person who's a tzaddik, he feels, if you want to say, sees God all the time. He sees that the world is just a big, amazing, miraculous miracle, and that God is creating it all the time from nothing. He sees it and he feels it. But mostly, that's the world. But then there's the Torah. So in order to feel the Torah, that's our responsibilities in the Torah. Yes. It's from the Torah. The Torah gives us tremendous responsibility and what we have to do to fix the world. The world is challenging us, begging for us to fix it, not to fall into any traps or get caught in the world, to get depressed and angry and things like this, but rather to make the world into the good place that it really is by ignoring the bad and by increasing good. Okay, this is a very nice thing to say, but it's not that easy to do, appreciating God, feeling God. So that's why we have the holidays. That's why we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's like we're in the palace of the king. The whole rest of the world, we think that we're the king. And then suddenly comes Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, suddenly we feel that we have been taken into the palace of the king. And depending on how serious you take it, either it's a tour, you just sort of go through it, or it could be you just don't even want to go in. Say, I'll stay outside, smoke a cigarette, you go into the palace of the king. Or it could be that you think, well, to be the palace of the king, this is a tremendous, amazing opportunity and responsibility, and this. So that's Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But, a preparation for going into the palace of the king and being with the king is the month of Elul. And God gives us all sorts of inspirations and motivations and things like that. That's called the 13 attributes of mercy. So in this month, you feel a little more like there's something I'm supposed to do here. I'm here in the world for a purpose. I can't let another moment go by without trying to fix something up, fix the world up, according to the Torah. Every Jew wants to fix up the world. But the thing is to fix up the world according to manufacturer's instructions. So the Rebbe says, let's explain this. The Rebbe says there's two ways of looking at the world. I'm sorry, there's two ways of looking at the Torah and the commandments, this obligation that we have. One says that learning Torah is the greatest thing, and the other one says that doing the commandments is the greatest thing. So the rabbis had a big argument about this because it has tremendous implications. And they finally came to the conclusion that you have to have the Torah. The Torah is the most important thing because without the Torah, you won't know what commandments to do. The Torah inspires you to do the commandments. So in a way, the commandments are really more important. But you can't get to the commandments and the importance of the commandments unless you learn the Torah. So the Torah is essential. Of course, the Torah is also a commandment. Learning Torah is also a commandment, but it's not a commandment in action. When you learn Torah, you're supposed to speak. But speaking is something like action, but it's not the same thing as action. Right? How often we can see this, right? A person promises he's going to do something, and he declares he's going to do something, and he announces he's going to do something, and this just doesn't do it. Just doesn't. I'm going to give up smoking. This is it. I am finished. I am promising. I am declaring. I am this, and he just doesn't do it. Right? Just do it because it's easy to say things and even to think things, but not to do things. So action is the main thing. The action, that's the commandments. Judaism is the only religion that has commandments. That's the unique thing. Commandments means using this world to show how holy the world potentially is. So that's very important, the commandments. It says, but nevertheless, the Torah is more important because without the Torah, you wouldn't know that the commandments are anything. You think it's just like all the other religions. They have these rituals and customs, and they have their heritage and their practices, right? Okay, so it says finally, in order to understand this, what's the point of the argument? What's really behind this argument that the rabbis have? Is the Talmud greater? That's what they got to do, to argue about these things. So it says there's two aspects of God. One is called how God fills the world and how God surrounds the world. And this is hinted at two different sentences. One sentence says, the heavens and the earth, I fill. God is saying this. I fill the heavens and the earth. And another sentence says, the earth is filled with his glory. So this one's talking about first person. This is talking about the third person. It says, God is saying, I fill the heavens and the earth. And this one says that the earth, doesn't mention heaven, the earth is filled with his third person glory, not God's self, only God's glory. So what's going on here? The earth is filled with God's glory. What do you have to say that? We just finished saying that God himself, not just his glory, God himself fills the heavens and the earth. What do I care about his glory? God himself says, I fill the heavens and the earth. But another sentence says, no, it's not so. It's not me, it's just my glory. And it's not really even my glory, it's like his glory. It's a third person far away. And it only fills the earth. Okay, says the Rebbe, what's going on over here? Says, it's known that there is Mamalik Holmim and Sovic Holmim. There's two aspects of God. One is how God fills the world, and another one is God surrounds the world. In a simple way, just to clarify before they start, God creates everything all the time. But on the other hand, God creates everything different. The world is tremendously, tremendously complicated. Tremendously complicated. All the little bugs all have respiratory systems and nervous systems, and then the amoebas and this, and that's the living. Then there's the inanimate things. What's called the inorganic. That's what it's called. Regular chemistry. There's all these molecules and atoms and how they work together and quarks and black holes and stuff like that. It's so complicated. And God keeps creating everything every instant, and every instant is different. Things get older, etc. So there's one aspect of God which is called he surrounds all the worlds, that it never changes. It's above all definition. That, in a general way, we can say that's the existence of everything. Everything exists, right? The same way that I exist, the angels exist. They all have this miraculous thing which is called existence. That's called Sovev Kalmin. It's above time, it's above space, it's above differences, it's above it's pure just existence. Everything exists. Ideas exist, people exist. The fact that things can exist, that comes from what's called God's surrounding the world. But how they exist, the different forms everything takes, that's how God fills the world. Let's see, let's look and see. This is going to correspond to the Torah and the commandments. And this somehow or other is going to go back to the main subject, which we talked about yesterday. That's the main subject, is talking about the month of Elul. And that the month of Elul, it says, God says, I am to my beloved, King Solomon is saying, I am to beloved, and my beloved is to me. King Solomon is saying, the Jewish people, go up to God, and God comes down to us, grazing in the roses. This is a sentence from the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. He says, grazing the roses. How'd that get in there? Who grazes in roses? It says the roses, a rose has 13 petals, and that hints at the 13 attributes of mercy that is revealed in the month of Elul. And that's what God does to us also. God feeds us these 13 attributes of mercy. He is the shepherd in the roses. He feeds us these 13 petal roses. In other words, there's 13 attributes of mercy. Okay, so that's what we're explaining. Let's not get confused. Says the Rebbe, let's look at the world. What's going on with the world? There's two aspects of creation. God is creating everything all the time. On one hand, everything is creation. It's just, if you want to call it, infinitely distant from the Creator. Creation. On the other hand, and it's the same, on the other hand, everything has its details, little details. That's how God fills the world. That's even, so to speak, further from the Creator. For instance, in the physical world. In the physical world, there is domim, tzameach, chayim, medaber. Mineral, plant, animal, and human. Shadomim, that mineral, hagam, shin nitaveh, that it's created also from the Eser Maimorot, from the 10 utterances that God made in the beginning of creation, right in the first 6 days of creation. V'nimshach bo, and these 10 utterances are drawn into everything in the world, whether it's mineral, plant, animal, human. There's drawn down godliness, life, me'oto amaimer, from that word that God spoke in the 6 days of creation. Commotion, nimshach, chayot alukut b'tzomeach. For instance, there's a godly force, life. Life is a godly force. Life is drawn down into the plants, v'chai, and animals. Nevertheless, chayotom etzumtzam, but it's a very, very small amount of life. Zero, small. Tzomeach has chayas yoser. Plants have more life than minerals. Hachai yoter. And animals have more life in them than plants do. Animals are more mobile. They can move from one place to another, not attached to the ground. Animals react more than plants do. Plants also react, but not like animals do. And also, Sameach, and the Medaber, and human beings have more life in them than the plants and the animals. So there's different levels, and if you want to call it the dimensions of life, which are drawn into every single thing. And every human being is also different. Lefi erech zeh gam ba'olam ha'solibrut. So this is the way it is in the physical world. It's the same thing with the spiritual worlds. God is not spiritual. God creates the spiritual. The spiritual worlds also have different levels, rabos, many, ulakulam, and all of them, nimshach chayas mishuna, and each one has a different type of life. All the angels, it says all the chambers. So every angel gets a different type of life. Every world, the world of Yetzirah, the world of Bria, And all this comes from, this whole entire business comes from what's called God's speech, right? In the beginning, God spoke. This is, in Kabbalah, this is called God's kingship. God's king, that's called Malchut. According to the teachings of Kabbalah, God has a personality. And this personality can be divided into 10. There's a book called Sefer Yetzirah. And it talks about the personality of God and how this personality is expressed in the 22 letters of the alphabet and the 10 Sfirot of God. And that's called the 32 paths of wisdom, the 22 and the 10. But it all comes from God's speech. Malchut Yisparech. This is the aspect of God that fills all the worlds, that it includes, it's in all the worlds really. But there's a level called Sovev Kalmi. There's a level of God which surrounds all the worlds. What does it mean? It surrounds, not that it surrounds around, it's outside and has no connection with the world. Exactly the opposite. Sovev Kalmi, and that's what gives the world everything, its existence. Angels, rocks, amoebas, everything is created exactly the same way. They're creations. This is the hashpah of ha'or elokut she'eino nimshach v'nitlabesh b'toch ha'olamot. This is a type of godliness which is not defined by any world. The bechin is gilui, liot musav, that we can understand it, b'hasagatam. We can't understand what existence is. It's hard enough to understand what life is, right? Life, you can't understand what life is, but you know it's different, right? There's things you can do. A person faints, passes out. Sometimes people die on the operating tables, right? You can give them a shock, you give them some sort of thing, give them an injection, and all of a sudden the soul connects to the body. So a little bit of a connection we can have with life and understand a little bit. We can sort of control life. For sure, you can take people's lives away, right? That's all these millions of people die in war. But to create someone from nothing, a human being can't do that. You can't create something from nothing. It says that there was the golem, the Maharal of Prague made, and in the Gemara it says that Rabbah also created a human being, but he didn't create him from nothing. He just put life into, right? It's just this aspect of mamalikom. He just put life into mud or whatever it is he knew how to throw, and then it wasn't he that did it. He prayed to God. He made his upper unities, whatever he did. I don't know how to do it, but he was able to, he couldn't create. A human being cannot create anything. Only God can create. Create means making something from nothing. We have no idea what it means, nothing. We have no idea what it means, nothing. There's some of these, physicists, they say it's a black hole. That's like nothing. It's like anti-something. It's nothing. That's not nothing. It's a thing. It's a thing. You give a name to it. Maybe it's a negative force. It's a whatever it is. Negative, nevertheless, it's a thing. To actually create something from absolute nothing, this is totally out of human intelligence, to the point where, I mean, I'm not sure, you can look into it, but as far as I know, I learned philosophy in university. True, I wasn't really very interested in it, but I learned, and I got a degree. And none of them talk about what existence is. They talk maybe about how to relate to it, and where does it come from, this existence? How do things exist? Like these the physicists, there was this guy Hawking, he had the whole thing figured out. I know where life comes, I know where creation comes from. You read the guy, you see the guy didn't know nothing. He knew nothing. He knew how to mix around with numbers and things like that. He knew about what creation is, what reality is. I don't know if he lived in a real life himself. And it's the same way with all these people. You can, science and these things, it's good to manipulate nature. It's a very good thing to improve the world, manipulate nature, to improve the world and things like that. But to try to say that I'm God and there's no God and use it to there's God, you have no right to do this. You have no right. Why? Because this aspect of creation is totally not in the category of understanding. It's not that it's so high we can't understand. It's not in the category of understanding. It's like trying to understand a symphony with your nose, smelling it, right? Just smelling. Right? What do you think of the third movement of Tchaikovsky's? One of those. Can you smell it? I don't hear anything. Well, smell. It's ridiculous. You can't smell a symphony. Right? So, infinitely more ridiculous is to think that you can understand God. Understanding is not the sense that we used of perception to have any idea what God is. It says this is the aspect of God which is called Sovikom. It defies all definition. Soviv, it defies all olmin, all definition. This essentially, like I said, is creation, just that God creates. Ella abad hu b'chinas maki, it's just surrounding from above. Okay, and therefore it's called Soviv Kolomim. It surrounds the world. It surrounds everything equally. She'ein below ischalkus. There's no division or definition or articulation of this essence of God. Since it's not clothed in any sort of a level, and it shines in one place more than another, etc. Okay, and therefore hu shavu mashve. It's equal because everything is an equal miracle. A stone is an equal miracle to an angel, to a human being, to the fact that they are existing from absolute nothingness, and that God brings it out. This is only God can do this. And this is totally impossible to understand, but nevertheless, everything partakes of it. That's why it says in one of the things of the Moshiach, it says that the whole world will praise God. We talk about this in the prayers in the morning. The whole world, the trees will praise God, and the rivers are praising God. In the Psalms, look in the Psalms of King David. The sun and the moon are praising God, and they're going around. And so it is also Shene'amar. It's a Shemayim. So that's what it says. At the heavens and the earth, I fill. This is God's essence. This is the level of God's essence. That's what it means. The heavens and the earth will praise God. They'll feel they're being created. This is the aspect of God which is surrounding all the worlds. We'll see this is connected to the commandments. The late atar panoimine, there is no place which is empty from God. Mashkatu, but one second, another place we just said and finished saying that what is not God's essence, but God's glory that fills the world. Mashkatu, that what it says in Malay color, it's kavodo, that just God's glory fills the world. This is the other aspect of God. That's called how God fills the world. But you know you're alive, you can feel you're alive, you know that life is a beautiful thing, you can appreciate that life is an amazing thing. Like I say, you have a little bit of control over life. A person can take life, right? You can take somebody's life. God forbid. You see people dying all the time. But we don't see people created all the time. You don't see people being created. You see people being born in them. Shenikra, like it says, kavod, that's called God's kavod, honor. You ever see a plant? They take a plant sometimes. Very amazing. Take a plant that's all withered. I remember we used to all withered up, you're going to throw it away. And listen, I'll just put some water. You put some water on there. All of a sudden, the next day you come, everything is standing up straight. It's all green. Sheneka kavod. So you can put life into a thing, so to speak, even though you don't know what life is, but you can manipulate it a little bit. But creation, you can't create anything. Hine Omer is all the rabbi say, Ein kavod el Torah. It says kavod, this aspect of God's glory, kavod. That's how God fills the world. That corresponds to the Torah. Hainu mishum, because the Araita michachma nafkas. The Torah was there before the world. The Torah is the blueprint of the world. Believe it or not, this book was written by none other than the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe wrote this book himself. He told Moses what to write when Moses was on Mount Sinai. And every single letter is exact. The Jewish people have been passing this Torah down for 3,333 years. Incredible, unchanged. They've been reading it. The Jewish people have been reading it in public 3 times a week, 4 times a week, since it's been given. Those people who come, no, the Jews have a different Torah. It's not the same Torah. That's the most stupid, uneducated thing to say. We got a different Torah now. I remember I read people saying that it's not the same. The Jews lost the Torah; they don't have it anymore. We have basically that's Islam is built on that. They lost the Torah. We have the real one. Okay, Shemi Chachma. It says that the letters of the Torah comes from God's Chachma. The world is created what's called the lowest aspect of God. That's called God's Malchut. But the Torah comes from, if you want to call it the highest of the 10 Sefirot, that's Chachma. The Torah comes from Chachma. That's called the Lamed Beit Netivot. We talked about that before, the 32 paths of wisdom, the 22 letters of the alphabet, and God's 10 attributes, his Sefirot. God's 10, that makes 32. That's explained in this book, Sefer Yetzirah. But that's the Torah. Ubamashal says that the Torah comes from what's called the 32 paths of wisdom. The 32 paths of God's Chachma, they translate it as wisdom, but it really means life force, something that's above. Bina is understanding, and Chachma is above understanding. So this is above understanding. So I don't know if wisdom is under. Okay, says that's the Torah. The Torah comes from God's wisdom. That's the aspect of God that fills all the worlds, commercial, like a nativ, like a path. 32 paths of wisdom, just like a path or a road that is made in order to go from one place to another. Also the same thing with the Torah. The Torah has this God's chachmas, upper wisdom, is drawn down in a way that it's divided and, how do you say, articulated. I like to use that word. Lios mamalik holmim, that it fills all the worlds. Ad sheyumshach bagashmis mamash, until it's drawn into the physical, actual world, every little detail. First of all, we have the laws of the Torah. This is kosher, this is not kosher. She'em binim gashmi, all of the laws of the Torah come into physical things. Trumot, maisrot, the portions of your crops. This is agricultural laws. The portion of the crops, especially in Israel, that you have to give to the Kohen, to the Levite, etc. All the laws and the details of the Torah, that comes from this aspect what's called mamalik holmim, the details of the Torah. All your mitzvahs, that's by means of the Torah. The Torah connects with this, all the details of the world. That's what we say is mamalik holmim, how God fills the world. But the commandments, that draws down a revealed light from sovev holmim, from what surrounds the world, which this is a surrounding level. It's something that can't be understood. And so it is also with the commandments. So it is also with the commandments. The commandments. It makes absolutely no sense why God wants us to put, a Jewish person has to put on boxes on his arm. A box on his arm and a box on his head. And it has to be on the proper arm, and it has to be in the proper place. And the boxes themselves have to be proper, and inside there have to be parchments. And there's to be exactly what's written on these parchments, exactly. If one letter is wrong, that even if you spent $3,000, $10,000 on your tefillin, it's not kosher. You got to fix the whole thing up. Right? Well, all these little details says that's the aspect of the Torah. The Torah. But the details. But on the other hand, why God cares about these details, why this is above understanding. That's the commandments. The Torah is to be understood. The commandments are to be done. You have to try to understand as much as possible in the commandments. There's secrets according to Kabbalah. What's the difference between the commandments and the tefillin and tzitzit and charity and putting a mezuzah on your door? Every commandment has its own unique connection to God. But the fact of the matter is, that's the understanding of the commandment. But the essence of the commandment, that can't be understood. And why God cares that I put these tefillin, this is not understandable. So it says, therefore, the Torah corresponds to this aspect of God, which is called filling the world. And the commandments, this is how God surrounds the world. It's above understanding. The Indian is like this. It's known that the Torah, when a person learns the Torah, it becomes food to his godly soul. Like it says, this is also the 5th chapter of the Tanya. It says, like it says, Torah it says the Torah is in my intestines. The Torah, a person who learns Torah, understands the ideas, it becomes like Torah. It becomes like food. And it goes inside of the person, unifies with him. And it becomes the person. Right? A person eats bread, and the bread, that's it. There's no more bread. And the life force in the bread, that becomes Shmerel. Or Moshe, whoever ate the bread, that bread all of a sudden becomes his life. All right, but that's the same thing in the Torah. The Torah also by means of the Torah. When a Jew learns the Torah, a non-Jew learns the Torah, it doesn't do the same thing. A non-Jew and the Torah is not the same thing. In fact, a non-Jew is not allowed to learn the Torah unless it's relevant to his commandments, to making him his life. Non-Jews have what's called 7 Noahide commandments. Some people say that there's also a lot, that's the negative ones, there's more positive ones. It's more complicated, but it's not the same thing as the Jewish commandments, 613 and other commandments of the rabbis. It's not the same thing. the idea of the Torah for the non-Jews is to give them a meaningful and an orderly and a blessed life. To tell them what to do, how to live a life according to their conscience, things that they already know internally, or they should know, not to kill, not to steal. The purpose of the Jew learning the Torah is to make the world holy, to reveal God here, not just to make order. Because by means of the Torah, there's revealed a revelation of God's wisdom in the world, the Yod Musag V'Hasaga Mamash, that it can, things that can be understood. Learning the Torah takes it into your mind. It's like food. Like it says, V'asim Devrai B'ficha, I will put my words in your mouth. That's one of the prophecies we just, Isaiah, I think. This is the aspect of God, how he fills the worlds. That it goes into the worlds in an inside way. But the commandments don't go inside of you. The commandments are garments. They are garments to your godly soul. This is in the 4th chapter of the Tanya. It talks about this. They are garments for your soul. For what the Jew has what's called an additional soul. He has what's called a godly soul. Shehu, that's what's called holy. Shehu, this is like a garment. A garment on the garment of a person. The commandments are like a garment. A person puts a garment, he doesn't put it inside of himself. The garment goes on the outside. Also the same thing. The blessing, which is drawn down by when a Jew does a commandment, is surrounded. It's something higher than comprehension. Because it's this aspect of God that surrounds all the world. It's totally above any comprehension. Therefore, therefore, garments are usually more valuable, they cost more money than food. Usually garments cost more money than food, right? A loaf of bread costs less money than a pair of shoes. Because because garments are higher in their source than food is. So Torah is like the food, and the commandments are the garments. The Torah then, but the garments in some way they're more precious. They cost more money. Garment, that's the commandments. And that which we learn Torah and we understand the Torah, I mean that's also, it's a mitzvah to do that. It's a commandment. So that when you learn Torah, you're taking it inside of you like bread, but you're also doing a commandment, especially when you say the words. There's also the commandment, so it surrounds you as well. And that's in the 5th chapter of the Tanya. Look right in the end of it. That's what it says in the commandments. That's what it says. We'll get to this in like 2 weeks. It talks in 2 weeks, we'll learn the 98 curses that await the Jewish people that God has in his, in his option suitcase to give to the Jews, at least to show them 98 curses if you don't do what God wants. All the things God forbid that happened in the Holocaust and the destruction of the temple, which the destructions of the temple was even worse than the Holocaust. Could be more people died, more presented. In any case, all these terrible tortures that nobody's suffered like the Jews. I mean, first of all, the Jews have been around longer, but there's no other nation that's been, kicked out of their land, and then everybody's raped, and then the Jews torture themselves. It says one of the reasons for this, it says because you don't serve God with joy. It says therefore you're going to serve your enemies, etc. It says you have to serve God with joy. Okay, I'll be happy. It says no. You don't know what type of happiness I'm talking about. God says you have to be genuinely happy. You have to really value the commandments. What do you mean really value the commandments? You have to value the commandments, mirov kol. You have to serve God, b'simcha b'tuv levav. That's what it says here, mirov kol. What's rov kol? The Arizal, the great master of Kabbalah. He lived like 450 years ago. He wrote the book called Eitz Chaim, pre-Eitz Chaim. So he said, rov kol means you have to serve God more than Gan Eden, than going to heaven. There's all sorts of prizes that await people that do what God wants, especially Jews. A Jew does the commandments, you get big prizes. You get big prizes. So when you do a commandment, you should be really happy. Says, really should be happy? Yeah. What if someone a big rabbi came and told me, good luck, good news, you're going to go to heaven. You made it. You're going to go to heaven. I was just in heaven, the heavenly tribunal, and they said you're going to go to heaven. You know what heaven is? Heaven is infinite pleasure. Infinite pleasure for infinite time, infinite pleasure. Take all of the drugs and all the victories and all the things in the world that you have. The pleasure you get from those things is like 1/70th of one instant in heaven, and you're going to heaven. Isn't that good? You should be really happy. Yeah, I'm really happy. Makes you happy. Well, you should know that doing a commandment in this world is higher and more valuable and should make you happier than going to heaven. Now, all these other religions in the world, they're berserk from going to heaven. They promise you're going to go to heaven. If you don't do what I say, you're going to burn in hell. No, I don't want that. You're going to go to heaven, and then, I will do exactly what you want in order to go to heaven. Of course, I'll do anything going to heaven. Here we're saying one commandment, doing the commandment, is worth infinitely more than heaven. So you should be as happy as possible. I don't know how to be happy like that, but you should try, at least appreciate it. You should know that there's a tremendous value. It's like if somebody, you just won the lottery. How much did I win? You won $1 million more. You won $1 billion more. $1 trillion? No, you just won the whole universe. What? The whole universe is yours. All the money, everything, all the spirit, it's all yours. What does it mean? What are you supposed to do? It says that's like the commandments. When you do the commandments, it connects to the essence of God. The commandments are higher than learning Torah. The commandments, it says they're the level of what's called surrounding. They're above even heaven. Heaven is intellectual understanding. A person can't get in this world, but after a person dies, his body doesn't interfere, so he can get this tremendous pleasure from going to heaven. From this, it says, that's why the rabbi said that deed is greater than learning. The commandments are greater than learning Torah. Because learning Torah is like going to heaven, right? It's intellectual ideas, grasping. Maybe we don't exactly grasp all the ideas, the pleasure of the Torah, but that's what the Torah is. But the commandments is talking about the Creator himself. That's the will of the Creator, not just the wisdom. Nevertheless, the rabbis they took a vote and they decided that learning Torah is greater. Why? Because learning Torah brings you to the deeds. The inyan is, so the answer is like this: it's impossible that you can draw down this Soviet calming, this higher level of God, right, by just doing the commandments cold. You can't doing just the commandments, which are physical things, tzitzit, from wool, tzedakah, giving charity, unless you have the Torah. Doing the commandments just because you see everybody else do it, so you do it, but you don't really know what you're doing. The Torah is the mittel, the pipe that draws the godliness down into this joins like a person that speaks. Speaking joins a person's thought, what's in essence, to the receiver. The same thing is the commandments, that's like God's thought. The world, that's like us. Speech joins thought, the commandments, with us. The commandment, what is the speech? Speech is like the Torah. That's what it says, Hayom lasotom. That's why it's so important to do the commandments. Hayom davka olam hazeh, this world is the place of doing. And that's the idea of tshuva. That's the idea of returning to God. Returning to God reaches the highest level, which is even higher than going to heaven. And when a person in heaven, you can't change anything. In this world, you have free will. You can change everything. And that's what we're going to see. That's the whole idea of the month of Elul, is God is giving us this ability, the 413 attributes of mercy, which is even higher than the commandments. It's the source of it. It's from the essence of God, higher than the Soviet calming. That's the month of Elul. God is giving us his essence, encouraging us to want to come closer to him. And that's these 13 attributes of mercy, which I would like to explain more but we've run out of time. So let's see, maybe we can just skip to the very, very end of this moment, which is not usually a good thing to do, but it's not a bad thing. Here we go. So it says, tshuva has to be, what does tshuva do? What does it mean when a person does tshuva? Tshuva means to return to God. Return to God. Or you can return to consciousness, or return to God what you owe him. Tshuva has to be, it fills all of the lackings. Anything that you didn't do a commandment, that you missed in learning Torah, even the Soviet Kolomim, this aspect of the commandment that you didn't do, and you didn't do it, or you did a sin, God forbid. So by means, things that you messed up and you lacking, you didn't learn Torah, you went against the Torah, tshuva fixes it up. And that's what we request from God. God, help us to do tshuva, help us to return to you. That's what it says, Rosh Hashanah. That's the month of Elul. It says the God is the grazer, and he feeds us these Shushanim, the roses. What do we say? The roses, 13 petals of mercy. 13 paths of mercy. That this is Sovid Ka'amim. The 13 paths of mercy, that they come from what this aspect of God that surrounds the worlds, and it comes down into the aspect of God that fills the worlds. That's the high. When is this really revealed? Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah, that's after Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that's doing tshuva. That's returning to God. Tshuva b'chinas hamshacha, this is but that's going up to God. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is going up. It says on Simchat Torah, there's the joy of the commandments. The joy of commandments that will last the whole year. Because the whole year, the past year, you have made blemishes. Person did sins, he was lacking things in his service of God. In Soviv Kolmim, because you didn't do the commandments like you were supposed to, so it comes out on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. By means of doing tshuva, returning to God, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you fill up what's lacking, and then by means of that, you get the joy of Sukkot. And Elul is the month when we get a little bit of a taste of these 13 attributes of mercy. It tells us, don't give up. No matter what type of sins that you did, no matter how far away you were from the Creator, it all depends on you and God. That's all. Say, God, listen, I messed up. From now on, I'm not going to mess up anymore. I'm doing your commandments. I'm doing what you say. I'm not going to do what I want anymore. I'm not the king of the universe. I realize that you are. That's called doing tshuva. And on the month of Elul, God inspires us to do this. On Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we actually do it. Return to the Creator. And that gives us the joy of Simchat Torah the whole rest of the year. And now we are going to learn Devar Malchut. Yesterday I forgot to turn off the recording, so it just came out one long class. But today, God willing, we won't do it. The best teacher is experience. If you don't make mistakes, you'll never learn anything. So making mistakes is not pleasant, but it's the only way to learn.